After more than a decade and $34 billion, the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion is today officially online. Back in 2018, the private company behind the pipeline backed out, frustrated by delays and what they viewed as a cumbersome regulatory process. The feds stepped in, as you could hear in that clip, buying the pipeline at the time for $4.5 billion, promising to sell it when it was up and running. So what happens now? And will the pipeline be worth the price, both politically and in reality? Let's bring back the front bench. Saeed Selvam, Gary Marr, Carl Belanger, and Laura Stone. Saeed, what is your assessment of, is this a political winner for the federal government? Is it a vulnerability? And how do you arrive at your conclusion, I guess, either way?
It's a tough spot to be in, especially when this pipeline's completion was estimated to be about $7 billion, now finishing off at about $34 billion. So we're talking about a massive increase in cost to complete. At the same time, this is also a government that prides itself on being a climate-focused government as well. So, oil is not necessarily associated with that, but I think what they're trying to focus on is the economic productivity that the completion of this pipeline will bring, not just to the domestic market, but also to the international market. When you have a cost of living crisis, when you have a productivity crisis, and we talk about ways of generating money and revenue for a country, taxing is one way of generating that revenue, but also exports are as well. So hopefully this encourages that our ability as a country to generate some more revenue. It's just, will there be enough time to get that return on investment realized within the next year and a half before an election? Let's see. Well,
what's interesting, to put a sort of finer number on it, Gary, Tiff Macklem, the governor of the Bank of Canada, says this pipeline is going to boost GDP in this country by 0.5%. That is not a small number. You'd think that would, in any normal circumstance, be something the government kind of uses as a selling point, right, for what they've done. But I wouldn't be so sure that they are going to be talking a lot about it because of exactly what Saeed laid out. It's always been a vulnerability on the climate side for them. The constituents of theirs who support, an emphasis on climate say, but you bought a pipeline, right? So I wonder how it ends up working out politically for them in the long run.
Well, I think it is an economic good news story for Canada. I mean, you and I, Vassy, we were at an event in Ottawa where Carolyn Rogers, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, was there. And she had said that, the weak economic growth of the Canadian economy was an emergency. I mean, we never hear central bankers talk like that. Here's part of your solution. This is the first pipeline that's been completed to the West Coast in over half a century. And yes, it was over budget. But that was because of a regulatory permitting process that made it very, very difficult. And my recollection is that on no less than a dozen occasions, the previous NDP government had challenged the pipeline in court on a dozen occasions and lost every one of them. So I think it's important to note that there is an economic growth story here. If you take the numbers that Tiff Macklin's talking about, expressed as a percentage of a $2.9 trillion economy in Canada, this will put billions of dollars of growth into the economy. It's a good news story. We need to have more of these good news stories, and we'll have some coming up as LNG Canada gets permitted, and hopefully if Cedar LNG comes online. I mean, the world is looking for what we've got. And think about this as well from an environmental standpoint. Being able to move 900,000 plus barrels of oil a day through a pipeline is going to replace a lot of trains that are carrying oil. Environmentally, there's no doubt in my mind, and we only need to ask the people of Lac-Mégantic, is it safer to move oil by pipeline or by rail? And clearly, a rail is the best. Is not the best option, and that we do need more pipelines, as we've had people coming in from Chancellor Scholz of Germany, Prime Minister Kishida from Japan, the South Korean Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of Greece, all of them asking for natural gas, and we should be in a position to be able to deliver that, and we need more projects like the TMX.
To be fair, I asked most of them, Carl, do you want the LNG? And they certainly all answered in the affirmative. I take Gary's point. I think Gary lays out what actually a lot of people in the federal government, in particular in the finance minister's office and the prime minister's office, feel about the pipeline, that it is a good news story. But I don't think they're going to talk about it in that same way, because I do think they view it as a vulnerability to politically among a constituency of people who they are going to depend on for support.
Yeah, well, I thought that Canada was broken, that nothing could get done. And now we own a pipeline and it's pumping oil, baby, and we can drill and handle it. That's fantastic. But you're absolutely right. It does nothing for climate change. And that's the brand that this government was elected on. It was not elected on buying a pipeline. And if the cost ballooned to 34 billions, why did it do so? Well, I don't buy the regulatory. The regulatory doesn't change anything. It was not a sustainable business case. So we'll have to see if they will actually sell it the way they said they would. And if they do, for how much? What's going to be the return on investment for Canadian taxpayers here who salvage something that was clearly not sustainable?
Although there is some return in the boost to GDP, but I take your point about what happens when they sell it, Laura. I think that's where the story heads next. Even the language you heard from the finance minister, we will dispose of it, was so interesting.
I'm laughing so hard at that. I picture her putting on her gloves and tossing it into the trash and never speaking of it again. Look, I think the Liberals will talk about this in the context of getting something done, as Carl said. And we heard the finance minister did allude to this in her budget speech, so they're certainly proud of that. I think it takes the edge off some of the carbon tax criticism too, in terms of the economic perspective. And we know that climate change, as Carl mentioned, is this government's brand. But right now, the world or Canadians are certainly talking a lot about affordability and the economy. And so I do think that the Liberals want to focus on that aspect. Will they be touting this at every stop? No, but I think they will be talking about writ large the economic benefits and impacts of this pipeline. And they'll certainly be able to counter the conservative criticisms that they aren't able to get anything done in this country.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see where the conversation goes. I'll leave our conversation there. Thank you so much to our front bench, Saïd Salvem, Gary Mar, Carl Bélanger, and Laura Stone. A quick